join. Okay, and then I'm just going to deny my, I'm not gonna put my fireflies in here, my chat recorder. So yes, obviously this is going to be recorded as well. So if you have other people that like to rewatch it, or you know, people that like to know a little bit more about yourself, Dr. David, always feel free to share it later. Okay, and then
sort of with the format, because we've had like the deep dive into one aspect of aging with the mitochondria, and then the more kind of like general view now.
Yeah, exactly. We need to bring awareness, so obviously from all angles, from all perspectives, and it's just very integrative. So this is why we want to have different topics, different moments, and see that happening. Okay, it's 8 o'clock. I'm just gonna wait 1-2 more minutes and see if the other people are joining too. Just gonna hit in the chat as well, because we had a chat group.
I think probably since the last talk went a bit longer.
yeah. So that's like
there would have been people who are going for grabbing a quick dinner or something.
It always happens, actually. You know, you set like an hour for these things, and you're like, oh, it's gonna be loads of time, and then it just goes so quickly. So
it just time flies by when you're having fun and when we're learning. So
yeah, definitely.
True.
Yeah. Okay, I'm actually going to start to introduce you a little bit to everyone here on the call. Welcome, by the way. Good evening. I'm very happy to have everyone here. So first of all, what the concept is about these longevity calls and conversations is the more the broader or the awareness, the more insights we have, I think the better we can make our own decisions and see what is implementable for ourselves and for the people that we have in our society. So this is why we're bringing this platform to people that we believe in, and that create a little bit more of knowledge. So first of all, thank you, Dr. David, PhD in neuroscience, University of Cambridge, researched the brain immune system and its role to psychiatric disorders. First of all, to start off with that, author of The Age Code, I see the book standing behind you, Science About Food and How It Can Save Us. As well, you hit about a lot of topics about saturated fat, dietary acidity. We're going to talk a little bit deeper into that. Leaky gut, fasting, and on the professional remains as well, like the strong standalone chapters and all of that. So we're going to hit about that. I'm just going to ask real quick for everyone to unmute themselves so that we really can have the conversation with David, and then obviously you unmute yourself later on. Great. So let me actually hop into our first question that we obviously had for you. So Dr. David, you left your research career studying brain immune system and its role to psychiatric disease to become a journalist. That's quite a career switch. What was the moment that you realized that bench science wasn't where you wanted to spend your time in your career? And what does that departure ever feel like with the unfinished business that now has translating to be your job and people's research of doing your own?
Well, thank you, Zita. And, just to start by saying, thank you so much for organizing these conversations. I think it's so great to, have these kinds of discussions about these things. And yes, to answer your question, I think the funny thing was I kind of began to just realize the importance of funding in research and just the sheer role which sort of money plays in breakthroughs, and, my lab, so I was researching schizophrenia, which, is a surprisingly common disorder. It affects 1% of the world's population, which people wouldn't think. It has this massive impact on our society, but it gets virtually no money, no awareness. And, when you're working like sort of on the inside, you can really see how that impacts our ability to actually understand the disease. The psychiatric disorders, they're some of the most complicated disorders. We have these sort of general labels like depression, schizophrenia, but they're really just umbrella terms for a whole collection of different diseases. In schizophrenia, there was like a common consensus that in reality, it was maybe as many as 16 different types of disorders, all with different biology. But you need a huge amount of money and investment to really be able to kind of conduct the study of hundreds of thousands of people to be able to sort of tease that apart. And, that was something I just didn't really realize, at 23, when I kind of began like my sort of research career. And over many years, I sort of suddenly began to realize just the importance of that. And funnily enough, this was the case for aging research for like a long time. People wouldn't realize, because now it's this huge hot topic, which people are putting millions, billions almost kind of into. But, for decades, some of the finest minds in science were like, why would you study aging? Aging is something that just happens to us. We can't slow that down. We can't reverse it. Back in the 90s, people who were researching aging, they were quite widely mocked and ridiculed by other people. They were like, genetics is where it is. And, in fact, obviously, all of these things we now know are very kind of entwined, and there's way more we can do. But it's quite interesting with aging, because that's all changed in the last 10 years, because it's had so much media attention, so much social media attention now. And now you've got these vast amounts of money being pumped in, and we've got this exponential change in the numbers of papers, the numbers of new discoveries being made. And so obviously by the end of my, my PhD, I was kind of like, in some ways, I could actually make much more change, writing about this from the outside and like drawing attention to some of these things than I can from the inside. And, it wasn't an overnight switch. I sort of had a double life for like a while. Like I was sort of, by day, I was a researcher, and by night and at weekends, I was working as a part-time journalist during my PhD. But it was really by the end, I was like, what, we're not going to get anywhere with schizophrenia unless we get more awareness. And, that's where journalism comes in.
Wow. Okay. I thought that you were about to say, and partly at night I would be a party animal, but not a journalist. Amazing. Well, thank you, by the way, for sharing the topic. And 1% of the people suffer from schizophrenia. Concerns me a lot that probably don't have a lot of awareness of how many people are actually suffering.
100%. Yeah. So when you actually look at the numbers, 1% of the world's population, it's a huge, it's a huge burden on our society. We have better treatments like for schizophrenia, because schizophrenia also contributes to a proportion of violent crime. If societies would be safer, there will be less chronic illness. The sort of the burden of schizophrenia is huge. These people, require a huge amount of medication for a long time. And a lot of them, because of the inadequacies of the drugs, they get other comorbidities. Like a large proportion of schizophrenics end up developing type 2 diabetes because the drugs kind of exacerbate underlying metabolic dysfunctions. And again, so that's costing healthcare systems a huge amount of money. So if you could do more to be able to diagnose the disease earlier and treat it better in the early stages and potentially even reverse it, that would save healthcare systems, governments, vast amounts of money around the world.
Wow. Okay. We hit already the topic about your book, The Age Code. One review of your book said that it works because of you put yourself and your own quest at the heart of it. So what did you personally believe about food and aging before you researched this book, and what turned out to be flatly wrong about it?
Yeah, well, I thought it was something I really wanted to do because, I feel with aging and nutrition, it very much helps. I think it resonates more with people if you live it, because I feel there's a lot of very unhelpful health advice, which sometimes just comes from someone sitting behind a keyboard. And, in the actual practicality isn't particularly that achievable. I feel one of the most unhelpful pieces of health advice is be less stressed. There are so many factors in our lives which are beyond our control, which contribute to stress. So I was like, I don't want to be that kind of classic person writing a book about do this, do that, and, you know, not actually trying it myself. So I was like, fine, but I am going to experience all of these things. I'm going to find out how biologically old I am in different ways, and I'm going to practice what I preach in different ways of like looking at how I can make changes, what's achievable for me to try and slow it down. And I learned a whole bunch of things. You know, I felt I was relatively well versed in healthcare. But I'll give you one example. Before writing the book, I really believe that exercise could compensate a lot for nutritional shortcomings. And I think, you know, I was a bit complacent, a bit smug, because I was a very active child. I played a lot of sport. I played a huge amount of tennis and badminton. And I sort of felt, you know, that having done all of that in my teens, that would shield me. But it actually turns out that you really cannot outrun a bad diet, which is quite interesting. And we see this in aging studies. You know, I spoke to one professor called Luigi Fontana, who's kind of one of the sort of the leaders in this area. And he carried out tests on a group of endurance athletes in the US who, like many people, you know, they were convinced that they could basically eat what they liked because they were doing just so much exercise. Like these guys are sort of running ultra marathons. But actually, he found that compared to the average person, they were aging quicker. You know, this is just the average person, maybe like sort of walking a little bit, going to the gym like sort of once a week. And part of it was because they were so convinced their body was basically like an oven, you know, and it didn't matter what they put into it, it would just be burnt off. But actually internally, when they did all these tests on them, it was a disaster. You know, they found their blood pressure was skyrocketing. They had irregular heart rhythms. And they even had quite a lot of plaques in their coronary arteries, you know, and these are people in midlife about how the big difference down the line. So obviously exercise is incredibly important, but if you just do one thing, you know, in many ways you'd be way better to say to eat well and just be getting regular walking, you know, whereas if you're running marathons but you're not eating well, you're probably going to be aging faster. That's quite an interesting concept.
Yeah, so that means that the nutritional topic of dietary food is hugely important, right?
Oh, definitely. And I think, you know, all of these things kind of combined, like sort of, you know, it's sort of the nutrition and exercise together, you know, rather than say doing one thing to an extreme, you know, and the same with, you know, sleep is also really, really important for healthy aging. But nutrition comes in with that because the timing of when you eat or the types of nutrients you're eating at different times of the day impacts how well you sleep. So it's quite interesting when we look at it, like, so it's very much a combined picture rather than do one thing well and it will save you.
Yeah. You also revisiting saturated fat topic where cardiologists and publicly at war at each other. So some call it anti-fat conscious, a dangerous myth. Harvard nutrition scientists call it that reckless. So which side is right? And are you willing to say, where do you think the field is most prominent when it comes to research, or what are they getting wrong, do you think?
I mean, I think saturated fat is a really, really interesting one. You know, I've been following this as a journalist for like the last 10 years. And obviously it has, you know, a lot of people on here like some might be aware of it, has a very, very long history. You know, this sort of like kind of demonization of fat kind of began like sort of in the 50s and 60s. And a lot of people were very, very convinced that basically by, you know, kind of cutting down like so kind of fat in the diet, that would solve heart disease and a lot of issues. And instead, like so the opposite happened. You know, the US infamously kind of began this war on fat. And instead, you know, as we've all seen, like obesity rates, chronic diseases only kind of skyrocketed in the last kind of like 50 years. And now like a lot of those people have gone to the other extreme. They're now demonizing carbohydrates. And you see like some online, a lot of people being like carbs are bad. You know, the people who are like really pro keto, they will just be like completely eliminate carbs, and carbs are the root of all health evils, which again, I think extremes with everything, there isn't much evidence really like to support that. You know, the body basically still ultimately needs carbohydrates as an energy source. You know, carbs are the brain's main energy source. I think the difference is it's refined carbohydrates, which are very much like so behind a lot of the accelerated aging trends we've seen in the last 50 years. And, you know, there's a lot of good fats. You know, we've learned so much about omega-3s, omega-9s, omega-6s. They all play like sort of a really, really key role. I do think that saturated fat, you know, Again, it's not a matter of just completely excluding it from your diet. It's getting like a better balance. Like aging science really offers like a new lens into saturated fat. The reason is because the way a lot of saturated fats are broken down in the gut is into these things called ceramides, which are these really, really inflammatory substances in your gut. And there's been a lot of very interesting research showing that if you're getting too many ceramides, they can actually change the behavior. They can almost reprogram the immune cells in your gut into a more inflammatory state. But again, this is the thing, because people then sort of take that to an extreme and they're like, oh, okay, I should never have butter. I should never have dairy again. It's more like, get just like a balance of saturated fats to fiber and omega-3s. If you sort of like, kind of like get that balance sort of more 50-50, you're going to be aging really, really well, you know. And, you know, I'm always asked, you know, the butter margarine debate is one of the eternal debates, like in nutrition. But ultimately, I don't think it really matters, because no one's eating that much butter. It's more a huge amount of the bad saturated fat we're getting in our diets is from ultra-processed foods. And I think it's like, if we can just minimize that just a little bit and increase fiber and omega-3s, the healthy fats.
Yeah.
That's my stance on it.
Yeah. You said as well about omega-3s. So obviously there's a lot of observational studies about omega-3s, but there's a lot of fish oil supplements that are mostly disappointing. Yeah. So in your book, you call omega-3s a powerful anti-aging tool. So do you want to tell more about this, or do you want to hit that topic too?
Yeah. Omega-3s are really, really interesting. I mean, I think there's such powerful anti-aging nutrients, you know, for a variety of reasons. We've long associated omega-3s with brain health because, you know, the fish oils, they form quite important structural components in our brain. They've also long been known to be good for heart health because they're anti-inflammatory. But we're also actually learning that omega-3s are really good for muscle. You know, as we sort of, a lot of us hit midlife, kind of undergo this shift in our body composition, we become more fat and less muscle, which is really, really bad for aging in many ways. And omega-3s actually like to support the maintenance of muscle if you're getting lots of enough of them in your diet, which is a really, really fascinating new aging breakthrough. They also even seem to be involved in one of the integral pathways of aging. So aging is at its core, at its most simplest, this balance between damage and repair, and getting more omega-3s at a cellular level seems to play a role in ensuring your cells are doing a little bit more kind of like waste sort of removal and cleanup, which is super interesting. But then there's also a bit of a nuance, because obviously probably the best way to be getting these omega-3s is through diet, you know, getting it through fatty fish, through salmon, through mackerel, all of those kind of sources. The issue, of course, is that a lot of people, you know, don't necessarily like those fishes, you know, or they're expensive, you know, or they're kind of inconvenient. And so people go towards the fish oil supplements. I think high quality supplements can play like the key role, but there's a few issues. I think that, you know, the supplement industry is just not regulated like at all. So there's no quality guidelines to kind of really assess how good is the omega-3 like within this particular pill. So people don't know. I mean, you know, one of the things I recommend is if you are going to get an omega-3 supplement, get one with an antioxidant within it, like vitamin E, for example, because that's going to be high quality. You know, as soon as you buy it, store it in the fridge to prevent it kind of going off. And I think some of this just creates a lot of noise, because we have some of these studies with omega-3s, so they give all these people in midlife fish oil supplements, and they found that some of them actually don't do so well, or nothing happens. But a lot really of that is possibly due to the quality of the supplements. And I feel like, you know, if I was going to put any money into a big nutritional study, it would be carrying out one with really, really good quality supplements, and maybe others with like, you know, not so good quality supplements, and see whether that helps explain some of the noise we're seeing, you know, because overall I feel omega-3s are incredibly powerful, but we need to, you know, have a better way so people know this is the right supplement to take, because they can make such a big difference to public health.
Yeah. They definitely can do. I actually want to build a little bit further up in detail about the omega-3s. Back in the days, they used to tell me, Zita, test your omega-3 by putting it in the freezer. As a lot of the omega-3s that were sold in the country that I'm from contained water. So so that they tell like, yeah, obviously oil doesn't freeze, water does. So a lot of the people or in my community that used omega-3 were taking ones with water inside. So obviously this leads where a lot of people have a bit of a double-edged sword, or like are scared of taking supplements as they indeed can't guarantee right now the quality and the results that they're going to get. What is unfortunately.
For sure. I mean, I think there's a huge need for like some kind of regulatory like sort of body which sort of ensures that what people are actually like so kind of buying like so within a supplement is, you know, is what we say, or there's some way of kind of grading like supplements so people are actually aware, because, you know, we know they can make a difference, but one of the issues for nutrition over the years is because, I don't know, there's been so much contradictory evidence with studies, and I think a lot of that is down to quality, as you say.
Yeah. Hey, what claim the wellness and the longevity industry has been laughed out of the room for that you actually deserves a second look at?
I mean, actually, I think, funnily enough, maybe vitamin supplements, interestingly, you know, because I feel obviously, you know, the wellness industry has been kind of pushing things like multivitamins kind of for years. And, you know, there's been lots of media articles, you know, years ago kind of saying that, you know, multivitamins don't really do lots of any good. I think it's quite interesting in recent years in aging science, we see these large scale epidemiological studies of looking at tens of thousands of people, which are actually starting to show that, you know, multivitamins and multiminerals can actually make quite a difference. But the interesting thing is, I think it depends on the age group. You know, if you're like in your 20s and 30s, no real need for you to be taking one of these things, which is quite interesting, because the people who tend to buy supplements often tend to be the young, who are already relatively healthy and can basically get exactly what they need just from their diet. But funnily enough, I think the biggest value comes in with the over 65s. And the difference is, by then, the gut is aging in different ways, which means that it's harder for your gut to get all of the nutrients you really need from your food. And you kind of just need a little bit of extra assistance. And also as well, because of aging biology, our body actually needs a bit more help. You know, our requirements for like lots of micronutrients really, really go up. If you look at our requirements for calcium or vitamin B12 or vitamin C when we're 30 and compare them to when we're 70, the needs are actually like doubled, and then that continues. Like if you look at somebody who's 90, they require even more of these things. And so to help people, that's where supplements can play a big role. And there was a really, really interesting study, I think 3 years ago, which Harvard did, and they basically looked at, I think it was 3,500 over 60s in the US, and they actually found that the people who were taking multivitamins, it slowed down memory loss and it improved different measures of cognitive function. And I think it's, again, because they were just getting that extra assistance, you know, from their diet. So supplements can play a role, but probably mainly in that older age group.
Yeah. Okay. So as well, then I'm gonna ask you something. If someone would hand you a 100 pounds bill, or say like, hey, I have 10 minutes a day, I have 100 pounds, 1 month or one lab test, what would you say? What would you recommend them that can slow down the aging?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one. I feel also it depends maybe on like how old you are, you know. I think like, so perhaps one lab test at the moment which is available, you know, I think, you know, perhaps like a biological aging clock, I think, you know, is quite interesting. Like, so just purely as a motivator, you know, I think we do see that, like, so psychologically, it's quite difficult for people to get the motivation they need to really have a consistent lifestyle reset. But if you do like sort of maybe 1 or 3 biological aging tests, and they're like, actually, hey, you know what, like you're 2-3 years biologically older, that can be a real like some motivational tool to do the simple things like improving your diet, like so doing a bit more exercise, focusing on your sleep, you know. I think that's one which can make like sort of a big difference, you know. And then you know, in terms of other things outside of diet, I think saunas is one of the big things which can make like one of the biggest difference. You know, there's this concept in aging of positive stress, you know, and so, well, like a heat wave is not good stress because it doesn't abate. You can't get away from it. But if you're getting like just a sustained boost of heat for like in a 10-15 minute dose, we're really seeing now that can slow down different aspects of aging. And it's because we have these things in our bodies called heat shock proteins, which are very involved in cell repair, and they can be activated by that short burst of heat. So there's been some really interesting stuff showing that people who do saunas 5 times a week and do it consistently over the course of years and decades, they don't experience as much cognitive decline. There was even a really fascinating case study of a guy like sort of in the States, and he had like sort of the ApoE4, the worst kind. Like, so this is a gene variant which we now know makes you almost 100% like destined to get Alzheimer's at some point in your life. And he had 2 ApoE4s, which is basically the worst combination you can have. It means it's, you know, you are at some point going to get Alzheimer's, and you're probably going to get it in your 60s rather than your 80s. Anyway, this guy basically reached 80, and they were like, he's cognitively normal. This doesn't happen. Like, we never see this. What is going on? And they studied the guy's behavior, and they discovered he was having saunas basically every day, and he'd been doing that for decades. And interestingly, it seems to be preserving his cognitive function, which I think is really fascinating.
Wow, indeed, that's stunning. That's totally new. So I've been doing saunas 3 times a week, so I'll keep pushing it up and high. I'm putting some more on then.
Yeah, it seems to be a dose responsive thing as well. Like, so if you're doing it once or twice a week, that's great. But if you're doing it 5 times a week, that's even better. The benefits seem to increase.
So you see really a difference in benefits in how much or the frequency of sauna use.
Yeah. It seems like the more lights, the better, basically, which is really interesting.
All right, interesting. That's really interesting. Hey, some other things, obviously, in the era that we live in right now, the name Brian Johnson and some others, and it sound for a lot of people quite familiar in their ears. And Chris van Tulleken and others have praised your book as partly to be a correction to those hypes. So is that culture doing more harm than good, or what is actually right, and where is the mainstream sleeping on?
Well, it's interesting, you know, I don't want to completely bash Brian Johnson. I know like a lot of people like to do, but he, you know, he has, you know, created a huge amount of attention in aging and longevity. And as I said at the start, you know, money is everything in science, you know, and through like, so doing the stunts that he has, the profile he's kind of created, he has instigated this longevity boom, which I think a lot of us are probably going to benefit from in different ways, because we now have like the money for clinical trials and all kinds of anti-aging interventions, and we're only going to get more and more answers, you know, in the coming years, and he's part of that. You know, at the same time, I understand a lot of people get frustrated with him because the guy's incredibly wealthy. You know, rather than spending, you know, $2 million a year on all this battery of tests and supplements he does, he could just fund a clinical trial and then he'd have all the answers, and the rest of us would benefit from that. So I get the frustrations with him. I think it's a little bit of a fine line sometimes, because everyone is so keen to sort of live to 150 or like sort of achieve immortality, you know, and there's, you know, longevity has got such a profile on social media. You get a lot of people like sort of who are either trying to make a quick buck or get attention, pushing things which are a bit sketchy, are not kind of quite like so ready for prime time yet. You know, one classic example is whole body MRI scans, which I think can make like so the big difference if it in the right people. But if everybody at age 50 is just getting like so the whole body MRI scan, there's an argument that it could do more harm than good, because there's a lot of people who are perfectly healthy but just have some minor abnormality somewhere in their organs, and that's picked up, and then they end up having an invasive biopsy or even surgery or some kind of intervention, which can then end up causing more harm than good. So I think that's sometimes where the fine line is. There's also things like NAD. You know, anyone who follows longevity will have heard of NAD, and I'm super interested in it, you know, but this isn't a new discovery. We've known since the start of the 20th century that NAD basically kind of declines in our cells, like so with age, and it's one of the main reasons why we have less energy, you know, when we're 60 compared to when we're 20. But at the moment, a lot of people are just trying to artificially boost NAD, like so in cells through supplements. And we have no idea of like, so what the right dose is. You know, we don't have any idea of does just artificially, giving more NAD, does it just exacerbate the problem? Because the NAD is leaking out of the cells, and are you just putting more pressure on that leak and ultimately going to cause it to flow out faster? That's one idea, like, which I've heard, and a lot of the evidence for NAD is all in, worms and mice, which are very different biology to a human. We have very little knowledge right now for the average 50-year-old. If you start taking high dose NAD, will that do more harm than good? And I think sometimes that's where the hype gets a little bit ahead of the science.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. Even on the NAD topic, so there's a lot of people indeed that take now to recharge their cells, but they actually never looked indeed how the biogenesis is of these cells, and even like the decline. So they only focus on what's there when science has caught up already on other parts as well. But it's all changing quite rapidly and fast. Hey, I have some rapid fires for you.
Sure.
And just as well, another question that I'd like to ask you is, obviously, like with the come of AI, and obviously knowledge being so widely spread, what's a discovery you think in the coming next 10 years that you would just refine and we know about aging? But wouldn't we park about your book and all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I feel like we're going to have better biological aging tests. I think that's the big thing. For example, there's the one which is the gold standard at the moment for seeing how well your DNA is aging, which is GrimAge. But GrimAge is quite old. It's been already around for at least 10 years. And, we're going to have way more precise means of tracking DNA aging, and probably a combination of different tests. I think in 10 years' time, there'll be some tests which tracks chemical signals in your blood. There'll be another better test for measuring the DNA on cells. And there probably will be like a microbiome aging clock as well. And together, through all three of those, you'll get this much more precise explanation for not just how we're aging, but why. And that's where AI will also kind of come in. You're going to be able to get like some all these different things, and AI will help in the interpretation of it, both for doctors and for people. I mean, one thing which people might not be as well aware of, I think we're going to learn a lot more about chrononutrition, which is like basically when we should be eating. We know that most people's bodies operate better by eating more earlier in the day, but there's probably some people who are genuinely biological owls. This means they burn calories more efficiently at night. And this probably explains some health disparities. Most of us are basically consuming most calories later in the afternoon and the evening. And that for them is incredibly harmful. But for a small proportion of people, maybe 10 to 20%, they're probably totally okay with that. And that actually works really well for them. And they're aging quite well by doing this. So, and this is all down to basically variations in genes relating to circadian rhythms. And I think it's going to get a much better knowledge of being able to kind of pinpoint, okay, for you, this is okay, kind of keep doing that. And for you, you should change your eating pattern, and stuff like that is going to come.
Interesting. So that's actually the topic when they speak about time. If you would be on an island, which type would you be? Would you be the person that wakes up, that lives through the circadian rhythm, or are you indeed the night owl or an early bird, or how is your body clock working? So it might be related to that then.
Exactly. And also, another interesting thing we're going to learn a lot more about is the genetics of centenarians. We know there are some people who can live to 115 and do everything wrong. And, the reality is they probably have some combination of genes which are facilitating that. And we know a handful of those at the moment, but we're going to get way more large-scale DNA sequencing of the genomes of centenarians and supercentenarians, which is going to provide these clues. And maybe I feel in 10 years' time, we could be in a place where DNA sequencing is so cheap. You can have your DNA sequenced at like 30 or 40, and they can tell you, okay, like for you, drinking alcohol, that is fine. You can do this amount of damage to your body, and your body can cope with that. But for another person, this is going to drastically age you. You should probably quit alcohol entirely, and you'll get those kinds of recommendations.
Amazing. I mean, let's see indeed where this goes, because for a lot of people that might be very beneficial. Hey, let's just go into some quick rapid fires. What health advice do you regret ever repeating?
Health advice, as in just advice I've given like to myself to people.
Yeah, or advice that you followed and that you thought like, oh, this was the worst thing I've ever done in my life.
I think perhaps I 11 years ago I was very, very interested in keto. I mean, I still feel like some ketogenic diets have a role, like for some people, but I wrote a little bit about some of the theories that ketogenic diets can help, like sort of kind of people with cancer and maybe even people with dementia. And I feel like I regret that like a little bit, because that's sort of been taken on like sort of a lot on social media, and there's really not that much evidence at all for it. And I feel in some cases it can do more harm than good.
Yeah. Okay. What is the most overrated supplement on the market right now?
Oh, probably vitamin D infusions, definitely. I think there's so many clinics out there who are basically offering these like really, really high dose vitamin D, and I think it can be dangerous, I feel like, in some cases, because vitamin D is stored in fats, and it's basically like, we call it a vitamin, but it's basically a steroid hormone. And, if you're giving these crazy amounts of vitamin D, which are just building up in your tissues, we have no idea, like, so what that's really doing, like, so over time, like with a lot of vitamins, there's a minimum dose, but there's also, definitely a maximum dose, and we don't really know that much about that. So I feel that's maybe one which I'm a bit more skeptical about.
Okay. The scariest agent static that you know about?
I think the scariest stat is definitely the rise in cancer in the under 50s. No one likes to kind of really fully understands why. There's various theories. Also there was a study which came out 2 months ago, which actually they took, I think, blood samples from like millennials, my generation, and compared them to the baby boomers born in the 40s and 50s and Gen X born in the 60s, and they found that millennials were aging faster on a cellular level quite consistently, and this is done across tens of thousands of people. And that really just points to this whole, we're aging faster sooner, which underpins my entire book.
Wow. Okay. So what is the most underrated or boring habit that you would stick to?
I would say actually, just the benefits of walking, really are quite substantial, and just going for a short walk after dinner. Like, so that there's really quite consistent likes of evidence showing that can really play a big role in just normalizing your blood sugar levels. You're getting like more movement in your day, and it's a simple thing everyone can do. Anyone can like walk for 10 minutes, after eating.
Okay, so we need to change our conversations from sedentary to a walk somewhere soon.
I mean, I feel as well like, so when about exercise, everyone kind of thinks, oh, I have to run, I have to go to the gym. Actually walking, makes a big difference.
Okay, amazing. Thank you, by the way. I saw as well that there was a question coming in from Present. Present, do you maybe want to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself? If he's there.
Yeah, sure. In that case, yeah, I'm still here. No, because you are suggesting that you will be reading the question, so I thought it will be better to post it. Dr. David, hi once again. So the thing that I wanted to ask was majorly like there has been a talk going on that the genetic based diet is better for every individual. So what is your take on that? Like,
what? I didn't fully hear the question. What's
whether everybody should design their diet based on their individual genetics?
Oh,
yeah, I'll repeat. So what is your opinion about the genetic based diet? Because there is some. Is there a network glitch or something?
Would you be audible now? Just you're breaking up. I can only hear part of the question.
Let me just as well say like what I understood from it. So he was asking, there's a discussion that diet should be designed according to the person's genetics.
Yeah.
What is your take on this? This is correct, right? This was your question, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Definitely. I think it's really, really interesting. I think at the moment, like, so we don't know yet enough to be like, okay, like, so kind of for you, you can have more carbs, you can like some more fat. We haven't quite got that yet, but we do know that's for certain things, so for example, there's about 40% of people who respond to whole grains so well in terms of their blood pressure that for those people, you know, rather than having like a blood pressure medication, it would actually be more effective to actually just prescribe them lots of whole grains. And that would be really, really fascinating because, you know, if you could pinpoint lots of those people, the GP could just kind of give lots of a voucher for like more whole grains, like rather than having to give like ACE inhibitors, which is the current like standard of care, and that comes with side effects. So I feel we're going to like sort of discover more about how to pinpoint these different segments. You know, one which I highlighted in the book, which is interesting, is coffee is the most widely consumed drink in the world. But really, from what we know, it seems to bisect the population into fast metabolizers and slow metabolizers. And, you know, fast metabolizers can drink 4 to 5 cups of coffee a day, which, you know, seems to have all kinds of benefits from liver health to brain health. But the other half of the population, having that much caffeine would basically, you know, kind of increase their blood pressure over time and like so put their heart under more stress. So for those people, they should probably be maybe going just 1 cup of coffee or 4 to 5 cups of decaf, you know. So these kind of recommendations are definitely going to come more and more in the next, probably, you know, not even 10 years, next 2-3 years, I think.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah.
That's amazing. I just want to get more onto the topic about the coffee. Go for it.
But just with your answer, I got to understand that I'm coming into the category of fast metabolism because I can go up to 6 to 7 cups of coffee per day.
Yeah, well, that just shows you, you know, like, so it's for you, drinking that much caffeine is probably a really, really good thing. You know, there's really fascinating studies now like showing that caffeine can actually protect against fatty liver, which is one of the biggest rising chronic diseases, which is super, super interesting. You know, there's even studies showing that people who are getting, you know, 3 to 4 like cups of coffee a day who are fast metabolizers, it can protect against dementia like long term. So it's quite interesting. Well, as for me, unfortunately, I'm a slow metabolizer. I discovered that through writing the book. And, you know, if I have consistently 3 cups of coffee a day and strong caffeine, my eyelashes start twitching. So that's yeah, I can actually feel the stress on my body. So yeah.
I see. For me, it's the other way around. If at all I feel stress, I want a coffee.
Yeah. I think someone called it panic juice. And yeah, I think it's going to be such anxiety. It's very much an individual thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I completely agree. Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
It just comes really down like what you're saying as well. It is a really personal thing, health and food, that we need to look at genetics, different types, different probably ages and stages the person is in as well, right?
Yeah. Oh, 100%, you know, and I feel like so the DNA aspect, you know, is a really, really exciting one because the cost of a sequencing test is like rapidly plummeting. You know, I remember 4 years ago, I wrote a story about how like the first, like the $100 genome had arrived, which was fascinating, given that, you know, in 2014, it was $10,000 at least for a genome sequencing test, you know, and now we're really at this point where actually, you know what, like every child born, particularly in some high income countries, could just have their DNA sequenced, and you'd be able to give them their parents this portfolio of information about, you know, what they should and shouldn't do as their life plays out, which I think is quite interesting, because we do know that also we think of aging as something which begins at like, you know, 35, 40. That's when a lot of people start to think about getting older. But you're aging from like the moment you're born. And, you know, some of the things which happen in childhood speed up the aging process, and you can compensate for that. But if you don't, then you're going to be at risk in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s for chronic diseases.
What would you want your own children or your future self at 80 to say you got it right?
I think like so for me, really good cognition, like so would be like so a huge thing because dementia sadly runs in my family, you know, like so on my dad's side, like 3 generations straight have basically kind of got dementia anywhere between 65 and 80. So I feel if I was 80 and cognitively normal, then you know I've played the age code, you know, I need to so you know I think there's a lot which we can do, which my parents and grandparents and great grandparents just did not know. But there's a lot which you can do in lights of midlife, which can make a big difference. I mean, yeah, I'm very keen to get a home sauna when I think there's a lot which is said for that, and just the different micronutrients. You know, there's a lot of people who are living with B vitamin deficiencies in their 50s who have no idea. And that is really accelerating the aging of the brain. Like maybe I think B12 deficiencies post 50, that affects as many as 20% of people. And there's probably a lot of people who actually have quite reversible cognitive decline. And, you know, so now, you know, for me, when I hit my 50s, I kind of know that, okay, that's something I need to look for. Oh, you know, we focus so much on cholesterol, but we don't focus at all on vitamin B12. And that's a very simple and cheap test to get. And I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there, which can be tackled. You know, people are looking at hyperbaric oxygen chambers and all this kind of stuff, but then sometimes forgetting the simple things. You know, we spoke about like Sir Brian Johnson, and Brian Johnson, you know, he had this post recently. He's got an autoimmune disorder, exactly. And it was all because he's the most measured man in the world, but he wasn't tested for one of the most boring markers there is, which is ferritin, which is an incredibly simple, like, sort of cheap test. And he had this iron deficiency, which just hadn't been picked up. And the guy is spending $2 million a year on private doctors, and that's been missed, you know. And I feel that's an example of how Silicon Valley, you know, can go after some of these kind of wacky things and forget some of the most interesting stuff.
Yeah. Fundamentals always need to be the cornerstone of longevity and not an afterthought.
Yeah.
Yeah, because as well, like you obviously you come from the background neuroscience. Is there any disbalance or deficiency that you notice that people with mental health or neurologically disorders have or carry?
Well, interestingly, I mean, obviously, you wouldn't really characterize schizophrenia as, say, like as a disease of aging, but there are some things which kind of go wrong, which resemble little bits of aging biology. So in schizophrenia, like at least for some of them, it's like it's an immune disease, you know, it's an inflammatory disease. The brain's immune system basically goes wrong, and it starts rewiring the brain in different ways. And these people, like, so they have like some very high levels of inflammation, like, so in their blood, which is kind of precipitating like so a lot of the symptoms of the disease. There's also a proportion who have metabolic dysfunction, which is why, and somehow the brain's energy system is getting rewired, which is why they're creating things which aren't actually there, and where they're having this paranoia and these delusions. And then if you basically put these people on antipsychotics, they end up gaining weight and like so becoming very metabolically like so unhealthy. And you know, and obviously we know that people develop like some metabolic disease. It's one of the biggest causes of accelerated aging. But also the brain's immune system has been very overlooked in aging, you know, which I find quite interesting. Everyone thinks about like plaques and the toxins driving Alzheimer's, but a lot of the time it's also the brain's immune system, which is maybe making a bigger difference.
Interesting. I mean, the brain is a quite tough, like the brain doesn't really, I mean, it's very protective on its own, so it doesn't really allow ingredients as supplements to go in as much as other parts as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. But the bigger problem is that the brain's immune system is doing such a key job in terms of just removing toxins from the brain, like so spotting the buildup of like some toxic plaques and things, and preventing things from kind of getting into the brain, killing off like any pathogens which manage to get through, you know, and just cleaning up like waste. You know, waste is one of the biggest issues with like aging. And the whole issue is that, you know, when people like to kind of get to 60, their brain's immune system is just not working as well, and so they're just getting more and more waste kind of like building up, and that's contributing to cognitive decline. We know a lot of this is basically because the brain's immune cells become senescent. We basically, they're colloquially known as zombie cells, and they're creating more inflammation, but they're also just not carrying out their functions anymore. So your brain's kind of getting filled up with more and more of these non-functional cells. And one of the interesting theories, in diet is the fact that there's plant chemicals called senolytics, which are found in the berry family. Blueberries have long been associated with preserving or improving cognition. And there's now a theory that you're basically microdosing senolytics, which are these plant chemicals which can stimulate the brain's immune system to remove some of these senescent cells. And that's how diet can interact with cognition, which is really interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, that's very interesting, and I'd love to see more of that of these studies in the future. I don't know if any of you guys have more questions or topics that you want to ask Dr. David. Now he's here live with us.
No, from my end, I am good. Just that how Dr. David was saying about how the brain is protecting itself and its own immunity. Even I was also thinking how that blood-brain barrier acts as the biggest wall which is protecting from anything else. And even if we try to improve the antioxidant potential or anything inside the brain, but still that is being as a gatekeeper trying to stop anybody else from entering.
For sure, definitely. But I think one of the things with the blood-brain barrier, which is quite interesting, is, we talk about leaky gut quite a bit, but you also do have leaky brain. That barrier just becomes more permeable as we get older, which is, probably why it's quite interesting. They've done some of these studies and they found lots of plastic, in the brains of people with Alzheimer's. And obviously, the way the studies was done was slightly flawed, and no one knows, did the contamination happen afterwards in the lab, or but it is quite plausible that maybe the Alzheimer's and the dementia disease process is making that blood-brain barrier more permeable, and that's causing plastic or probably infections to get into the brain. There's a big theory that things let's take the varicella zoster virus, which most of us get in childhood through chickenpox and stays dormant kind of in our system for a long time. Now we know that at times when our immunity declines a little bit, you get reactivations of the varicella zoster virus in the blood. But actually, and the interesting idea is that virus can maybe then cross over into the brain, particularly as that barrier becomes a bit more permeable and leaky, and that can contribute to cognitive decline. So.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, I can speak, I can ask all night, all day about this. I don't know if you have more questions, Prasant, as well.
No, as of now, yes, it is. I mean, so much of enlightenment for the day for me, actually. Yes.
Amazing. Great to hear. Dr. David, I'm just going to ask you something real quick. Is there something else interesting, or that you're your eyes are lighting up right now, that you're doing research in, or that you'll be this is going to be the next very much new thing for the world to know?
I think one of the interesting aspects of aging, which has often just been overlooked, is these toxins called advanced glycation end products, like AGEs or AGEs. And we know that the more AGEs you consume through your diet, basically, the faster you age. And there's two ways in which we get them. It's one of the reasons why sugar basically ages the body, or refined carbohydrates. Basically, every time you're sort of getting these kind of quick glucose spikes, you're getting this reaction being formed by sugars and proteins or fats in the bloodstream, which creates these toxins, which then bind to collagen. They stiffen your skin. It's why you end up developing wrinkles, but they also stiffen the heart and create all these invisible things. And the interesting thing about AGEs is everyone's kind of known a link between sugar and AGEs for a long time. But actually, there's an emerging link with processed foods. You know, anything where foods are basically being created at really high temperature, really high pressure, and you've got this combination of proteins and sugars, you get them formed in like really, really high quantities. And at the moment, our knowledge of this is still, we're still literally just scratching the surface. You know, we know that we estimate that our immune system can cope with like a certain number of these, but that really is still just guesswork at the moment. We don't really know the safe limit, and that's something which, you know, can inform like a lot of people. There's also a big question of can you produce like a processed food with fewer ages, you know, and there's various ideas of ways in which we might be able to to do that, which could make the food system healthier perhaps in years to come. Just other interesting ideas as well is, can you actually help the body in removing ages? You know, there's a biotech in the States who's done like a fascinating trial at the moment. Basically, they've developed an enzyme which they claim is capable of degrading ages within the body, which could be huge. You know, that could reverse one of the major hallmarks of aging, you know. So I'm really excited to see how some of these things actually play out. But that's a really, really untapped area, which again hasn't had the amount of funding and money which it deserves, which could make a big, big difference going forwards.
Yes, I'd love to see that play out as well. That would be amazing, and indeed that we get more data, more research out, more different angles.
Interesting. I feel like, you know, one of the things that could drive that is aesthetic medicine, because we know that ages are involved in basically, you know, degrading collagen and causing wrinkles and loss of elasticity in the skin. And obviously everyone wants to look younger. You know, that's where like a huge amount of money kind of comes in. So, you know, I feel that could be a key source of funding for some of these trials, looking at whether this can really kind of degrade, and then that will perhaps to feed on into benefits of heart health and brain health and all these other things which ages kind of contribute to.
Yeah, I mean, that would be amazing. Let's see, let's hope, because obviously I'm coming from the aesthetics longevity background. So glycation is a major thing that we see in the interlinks of collagen, because it actually breaks it down. It plaques, it glycates, like they say, but indeed glycation happens in a lot of parts of our body, and not only as in wrinkles, but indeed you mentioned heart, but I've seen studies as well on bones. That we toast ourselves on the inside basically until our body can't react anymore with it, because still every time you say and we have a blood sugar spike, it's a coping mechanism to something that our body can't store. So it copes wherever we it needs to find its way.
Oh, 100%. I mean, one of the analogies when I was writing the age code was because it's glycation in a creme brulee, which creates that caramelization of the dessert. And it's basically, you know, the chef is actively glycating sugars and proteins to sort of create that kind of unique, but that's what's happening to us on the insides. You know, we are caramelizing on the insides as we eat more sugar, as we get older. So it's quite an interesting, quite visceral way of looking at it.
Yeah, you're gonna let me look at creme brulee in a totally different way now.
Someone told me that as I was writing it, and I was like, gosh, that is quite a compelling and disturbing analogy.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Dr. David. Thank you as well, Prasanta, or how do I pronounce your name best? Prasant. Thank you as well.
Yes.
Because you're right now in India, if I'm correct, right? Or whereabouts are you right now?
Yes, I'm in India.
Yeah, so I assume that's right now. You're running 2 hours ahead of me? I'm in Dubai.
1.5. I think you are in UAE, right? Yeah, and then 90 minutes ahead of me.
Yeah,
so it's 10:30.
Wow. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much for staying awake, and
Really?
thank you.
It's okay. It's part of our routine. Because people who do science, I think we shouldn't be looking at our clocks.
Agree.
Exactly. Well, really appreciate you attending, and you know, the age code is on sale in India, so do check it out if you're interested in reading more.
Definitely. I'll yes. Sure. And I keep forward. I'm looking forward to have much more discussions with you as well.
We will.
Definitely. Look forward to it. And yeah, thank you so much again, Zita, for hosting. Really, really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
It was
Thank you so
brilliant.
much.
My
Thank you,
pleasure.
Zita. Thank you, Dr. David. Yes.
My pleasure, my pleasure. There's a lot of people that will be watching or will watch the replay as well. So for them as well, if there's any questions, if you watch the replay and you have questions for Dr. David or for me, or maybe for you, Prasant, reach out to us, and we're more than happy to answer any questions. And hope to see you guys somewhere soon.
Definitely. Yeah, send me a message on LinkedIn or whatever if you have any queries.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Amanda, and sharing all your knowledge, and wish you a wonderful day and night.
Thank you, guys. All the best.
Both of you.
Good night.
Good night.
Yes.